Hello, everyone. My name is Liz, but I think it would be wiser to call myself Medusa the Gorgon and tell you something about my stage image. But I have to disappoint you. I'm not an actress, or almost not an actress, and I actually walk around and live like this. But I won't confuse you anymore. I'll move on to the most important part. Once upon a time, I was an ordinary blonde girl with beautiful green eyes. My mother gave me a new hairdo every day, styling my hair beautifully or braiding ribbons into it. Everyone said that I would grow up to be a real beauty. My mom enrolled me in a course for young models, and there they taught me how to walk, pose for the camera, and carry myself on the runway. Of course, all this was aged appropriate, and the training felt more like a game. Because of how cute I am, I have often been hired for different shoots and photo sessions. This has brought in good income for our family, useful connections, and raised my self-esteem way up high. I was sure that my life would be connected either with the modeling business or the film industry in the future. In the end, I had an excellent foundation for either, and hardly anything could stop me from pursuing them. At least that's what I thought at the time. One day, I got a very interesting offer, one that was impossible to refuse. I was invited to shoot for an exclusive hotel located in Brazil. Naturally, the shoot took place there, so without thinking twice, my mother and I signed a contract and traveled there right away. On top of filming, we were looking forward to a week in a picturesque hotel, completely free of charge, and all sorts of goodies like trips and rafting. You can imagine that this contract was a dream come true. When my mother and I arrived at the place, the landscape and view there turned out to be much more mesmerizing and enchanting than in the photo. It was truly a paradise. I had never seen such a beautiful place before. I wanted to disappear into it and merge with nature, but we had to focus on work because soon we had to start filming. For the first 2 days, all of our work took place inside the hotel, in rooms, pools, cafes, and spa. They fed us very tasty food, providing a full range of services, and gave us a lot of brand name clothes, all for filming. Everything felt very VIP. On the third day, I was told that today the shooting would be on the beach and in the forest relaxation zone. I was delighted. Finally, I could fly out of that golden cage, at least for a little while. And yes, the hotel, sandy beach, were magical. The white sand was dazzling, and it felt like soft cotton. It was so fun that day. I thought I would definitely come back there to relax in the summer. Not to work, but to relax. But I did not know yet that the day would forever change my life. Soon, my dreams would become much more earthly and basic, and it went like this. After the beach, we went to the relaxation zone, and there I had to pose on hammocks surrounded by dense greenery and trees, and the grass near the waterfall where the staff led morning yoga. There, I felt like a real Amazon. I didn't even know that on the grounds of the hotel, there could be a wilderness against the backdrop of civilization. I confess that the location was the most comfortable one for me, as if the forest was where I was in my element. At some point, I was acting out a scene on the grass, pretending I was at a picnic. There was a rustling sound next to me, but I didn't really know what that meant. I just figured it was some kind of bug. However, the sound was getting closer, and soon I felt something touch me. I shuddered and screamed in surprise. The producer asked me what had happened and even got angry when I said there was something in the grass. He asked me not to get distracted and focus on my work. My mom came up to me, and after she examined everything around me, assured me that there was nothing wrong and that nothing was nearby. So I went back to work, mentally beating myself for being so emotional. However, not even a couple of minutes had passed when I again felt the rustling and movement next to me. This time, I did my best to keep myself in check, so I didn't slow down the shoot. How I scolded myself for that. Why was I afraid to express my emotions and show my fear again? A few seconds later, I felt a sharp pain and burning sensation in my hand. that I was leaning on. But even then, I tried to be silent.
What was wrong with you today?
The producer snapped irritably when he saw my face twist in pain. Only then did I allow myself to scream and jump. Mom immediately rushed to me, asking what was the matter, and I showed her my hand, which was literally swelling before our eyes. And someone from the film crew shouted that a snake was crawling away from me, and it filled me with horror on top of pain and shock. A snake? A snake? Oh God, I was going to die. There was a commotion going on around me, but I was already pretty out of it. Not understanding what was happening, I was taken to a local hospital where I received an antidote, as the doctors assumed that it was a venomous snake that had bitten me. Then, just in case, I stayed in the hospital, even though I had gotten first aid. As it turned out, they left me there for a reason, because all the pain of the bite didn't go away. The burning spread more and more. My hands started to look like elephants' legs. I had a high fever. Everything was very serious, and all that was left was to rely on the doctors and luck.
If only everything worked out. In the end, I would have to be in the hospital for 50 days. It was only after that I got a little better and started to become more aware again. After I was discharged, my mother and I immediately went home so that I could recover from what I had experienced and gradually return to my normal life, because everything that happened was a horrible shock for our family. I really missed my home, and I was sick of staring at hospital walls after 50 days straight. After a couple of weeks, my health improved a lot, and I even started thinking about going back to school and work. But there was one thing. My head started itching badly, and it made my life miserable. I was constantly scratching it, which made me look pretty ridiculous in public, so I couldn't go out just yet. I didn't care so much because the itching was really painful and intense, but the doctors couldn't figure out what was causing it. I ended up writing it off as nerves. That's such a good excuse, by the way. It works for every occasion. I sat at home and scratched what must have been every 2 minutes. That itching, that horrible itching, I even stopped sleeping because of it, and nothing, absolutely nothing helped me. I couldn't understand why this was all happening to me. And when misery would finally end, when my hair started falling out, I was sure I was dying. I became depressed. After a while longer, I was completely bald and my scalp was constantly moving. I didn't understand what was happening and I was suffering a lot. In the meantime, my parents took me to see traditional healers, homeopaths, and even shamans, but nothing came of it. However, sometime later, worms started crawling out of my head. It was impossible to remove them too. It hurt me whenever someone pulled on them. Because of this, I was admitted to the hospitals where the doctors could look me on. They needed to find out what was happening to me, but they couldn't turn up any results. So they needed to perform an operation and remove the worms from my skin. The doctor hoped that this would solve my problem, and I agreed to everything. If there was even a tiny chance of success, then of course I was in favor of it. After the operation, my skin burned like fire. I screamed and constantly asked for pain injections, which hardly helped. And as soon as the pain began to subside, that senior itch came back again. And the doctors reported that they studied the worms they removed from my head and said that they were not worms, but baby snakes. But how is that possible? And what did all this mean? My parents and I demanded an explanation and some kind of treatment, but I was only told that it had something to do with a recent snake bite, and that was it. Nothing else. As a result, I underwent this terrible operation 3 more times, but nothing ever changed. The snakes continued to be born and live in my scalp. After the 3rd operation, I got tired of all this and told my parents I wanted to go home and would not spend another day in that clinic. On the same day, my mother insisted on having me discharged, and we left. The snakes grew, but the bigger they got, the less they bothered me. Although it did become harder to wear them, especially when compared with hair. And because of my appearance, I couldn't really go out in public. Or rather, I had to become a voluntary hermit and completely refuse to go out. Medusa the Gorgon in the flesh. Yeah, I was better off at home. My parents tried to find answers to our questions on the internet, sending letters to doctors from all over the world and disrupting a bunch of different medical forums. At best, people thought they were making things up, and at worst, they were simply blocked. Mostly, it was the second opinion. We no longer believed in success. But once, a folk healer from Mongolia wrote to my mother. She said that the snakes are parasites, and to get rid of them, I needed to carry out an anti-parasitic cleaning. Oh, was it really that simple? We had no choice but to agree. I started taking herbs, potions, and pills that basically turned me inside out, but I couldn't back down. I had to see this through to the end. And when there were still 2 days left until the end of the anti-parasitic program, the snakes began to leave my body. God, I was so happy about that. I was already thinking of getting a job somewhere in theater and playing Medusa, the Gorgon, to somehow find myself. Could I really get back to my normal life again? 2 months have passed since the last snake left my body. Now I am bold, and I don't know if my hair will grow back, but at a last resort, I can buy a wig. It's better than having disgusting snakes in your head. Are you afraid of snakes? How would you react if you saw a snake in your body? Write your answers in the comments, like this video, and subscribe to our channel. Hi, my name is Lily, and recently Dad gave me a safe with a real treasure inside. However, to open it, I had to undergo numerous trials. Since the moment I was born, my dad had raised me on his own as my mother had passed away during labor. All his life, Dad had been recalling this and couldn't come to terms with the loss while bringing me up. He put family values first and said there was nothing more important
than nearest and dearest people. I followed this rule for so many years until I went to high school. I had to sacrifice a lot of things for the sake of constantly helping my dad and grandparents. Of course, I love them very much, but I was not satisfied at all with the way things were. Since I was not going to immediately respond to the first call of help for all my life, at first I just began telling my dad that I had to do too much homework and I would not be able to go to my grandparents who lived in the outskirts. He was upset, but came to terms with it, which I was incredibly happy about. Of course, I spent my free time not only studying, but also hanging out with my friends and having fun. For all the previous years, when I was chained with family values, I was distancing myself more and more from my family, but I didn't find anything bad about this. One day, Dad came to my room and brought me a small gift, which, according to him, was the most valuable one in my life. He held a ring in his hand, and even from afar, I could see the shining rubies. I was absolutely delighted, but when I saw the ring closer, my delight immediately disappeared. The ring was made of multicolored wire, and instead of rubies, there was ordinary cut glass in the red color. Dad said that it was a special day then, but I didn't listen to him because I was overwhelmed with bitterness. Once while swimming in the pool in the backyard, I lost that treasured ring, but I didn't attach any importance to this. Exactly 1 year later, on that very special day again, my father brought me another present. It was a small safe with a combination lock. I thought that there was money in it because usually large sums are stored in a safe. Dad didn't tell me the code, but he gave me a hint. Grandma Molly was supposed to help me get to know one part of the code. Another part was related to the most important day for our family, and the key to the third part was the ring he had given me. When he left, I almost burst into tears because of frustration. Why would he play me like that? Why couldn't he just give me everything that was in the safe without stupid puzzles about our family? After organizing my thoughts, I realized that the chances of opening the safe quickly were very small. I did not really count on the help of my relatives. For a whole year, I did not communicate with them. Well, I didn't remember what was special about this day, and I also managed to lose the ring. Being desperate, I looked at the combination lock. The first line of the lock was a 4-digit number. The second and third ones were 6-digit numbers. I tried to enter all the important dates that I knew, including birthdays, but this didn't bring any results. Now, the easiest way was to try and find the ring in the backyard because most likely it was not lost without a trace. The money inside the safe seemed very attractive to me, so there was nothing that could stop me. I was crawling on my knees all over the lawn for several hours, but I still couldn't find it. There was no ring in the pool either, so there was only one way left. I had to examine the sewage channel of the pool. I had never felt such disgust as when I had to dig through that stinky mud. Half an hour later, I was covered in dirt, and the ring was never found. If I had known that trinket was so important, I would have kept it under lock and key. The next day, an even greater trial awaited me. It was a trip to Grandma Molly's. The problem was that at the mere thought of the trip, I suddenly started going bright red with shame. Last year, I ignored her request for help, but now I'm going to ask her for it myself? I was really afraid that my grandmother would not let me in the doorway, or would start to look reproachful at me or scold me. However, contrary to my expectations, my grandma was incredibly happy to see me. First of all, I helped my grandma with household chores in order not to feel that selfish. And as it turned out, she needed the simplest help. Then we sat down at the table, and I asked my grandma about the most significant date in her life. She said that this was the year when Grandpa finally returned from the war. Risking his life, he conveyed valuable information which determined the outcome of the battle. For this, he received an award from the president himself. Many years have passed, and I already forgot about these, so I was terribly ashamed. Until late in the evening, I stayed with Grandma, listening to her stories about our family with interest. At home, I entered the required year in the first line, and I heard a long-awaited click sound. I was extremely happy, and not just because of the first deciphered date, but also because of an emotional talk with my grandma. From now on, I promised myself that I would visit her more often. For the next few days, I thought about another date, but I couldn't find anything. Then I had to go to my second grandma, but my grandparents were not really happy to see me. They were a little bit upset because I had not visited them for a whole year, for which I had to apologize for a very long time. Grandma could not hold back her emotions, and with tears in her eyes, she hugged me. They forgave me and invited me to sit at the table with them. When I asked about the most important day for our family, they confidently named the date when my mother found out that she would have a baby. That is me. The thing is that the doctors diagnosed my mom with infertility, but this happened to be a real miracle. At that moment, I hardly managed to hold back my tears. All her life, my mom was waiting for me to be born, but she never got to see her daughter. At that moment, I began to understand Dad's feelings and suddenly remembered about the ring. It was the most valuable thing that remained after your mom died. That's exactly what he said about it. I felt like a real soulless monster that lost this valuable thing with no remorse and did not even pay much attention to this. After saying thanks to my grandparents, I went home and the click sound of the safe was heard again. I was supposed to find out the last date, and it was related to the ring. The date of the wedding day did not fit, and I found myself at a dead end. I could not ask my dad for help because I was not able to tell him about the lost ring. Despite the fact that it was late in the evening, I went to the backyard again to continue searching. This time, I was looking for a ring, not only for deciphering the code, but also for the sake of my dad and the memory of my mother. I haven't found the ring, which is why I couldn't sleep at all. That night, for some reason, Dad didn't ask me anything about the safe, and I was scared that he knew that I had lost the ring. I needed to open the safe at any cost, so I came up with an idea. Mom had a sister, and they were very close with each other. The problem is that I did not communicate with her for many years. However, my intentions were serious, and I decided to go on a trip. After classes, I went to visit my aunt, and she was shocked to see me. My aunt said that I started looking exactly like my mother, and that sounded like a compliment to me. I asked her about the ring, and in response, I heard a story that I would remember my entire life. Once my young mom and dad were still dating and dreaming of getting married. Unfortunately, they did not have enough money to buy a good ring, so Dad came up with the idea to make it with his own hands. For several days, he had been making a ring from which he found investing all the love he had for my mom in it. He decorated it with red glass, which he polished and cut himself as if it were a ruby. On that important day, when Dad proposed to Mom, she was very happy, so she immediately came to my sister to share her joy. On that day, they both did not sleep. All night, they were crying and laughing with happiness at the same time. After this conversation, I came back home with a guilt deep inside my soul. I was so selfish towards my family that at first I couldn't even be touched by the story. I was so ashamed that I was ready to melt into the ground and disappear forever. The most painful part was the ring that I had lost. Sooner or later, Dad would find out about the loss and would be very upset, which I really didn't want to happen. I was not even that happy about the money in the safe. I entered the last date in the combination lock, and the door finally opened. Holding my breath, I looked into the safe, and inside, on a piece of velvet fabric, I saw a ring made of multicolored wire with a red glass instead of a ruby. It was the most valuable gift in my life. As soon as I came to my senses after the shock, I realized that my dad found it. At that moment, I jumped up and rushed to my dad holding the ring. After seeing me, he immediately realized that I regretted everything that I had done. He comforted me and didn't scold me for losing the ring. We were talking about Mom for a long time. After this situation, I learned to appreciate my dearest people and realized that everyone in the family should support and understand each other, as well as just being near. Every weekend, I try to visit my grandmothers or aunt to help them with something, or just to keep them company.
Hi, my name is Ariana, and I've lived in a real bunker all my life. Only when I turned 16, I was finally able to see the world and another life that was boiling on the surface for the first time. And it gave me a lot of surprises and even troubles. My story begins 16 years ago when my mother gave birth to me. My parents were very happy, but they did not have time to enjoy their joy as they began to see on many different channels that the end of the world would soon come. Allegedly, it was predicted by the oldest tribe of people whose predictions came true, one after another. Once, they were able to foresee the Great Depression and the Second World War. Since my parents were always very impressionable people who believed in these predictions, they spent all their savings on buying a bunker. In just a few days, they were able to collect everything they needed for many years to come. And the day before the expected end of the world, they went down into the bunker with me. But nothing happened on the appointed day. My father received radio broadcasts from which he learned about it. My parents, just in case, decided to stay in the bunker for a couple more days and were about to leave. Suddenly, it began to shake the earth. The quake was so powerful and lasted for several hours that the connection with the outside world disappeared, and the outdoor sensor showed strong air pollution, a small portion of oxygen, and very low temperatures. Then my parents were sure that the end of the world had come after all, and so we lived in the bunker for 16 years. My parents often told me what a wonderful life it was before the end of the world, but they also convinced me that everything had changed after the end of the world. There are probably only small wild settlements left, and our civilization no longer exists, my mother said, and sadly I believed them. What do you want from a girl who has spent her whole life underground? My parents have been saying all these years that one day we would come out when we were ready. Our mission would be to help the survivors and restore humanity. And when the long-awaited day came, I was really worried. It was scary to see the destroyed world, but at the same time, it was insanely interesting. Having dressed in protective suits, we opened the bunker and went out. It was dark and quiet around, but this was not surprising. We had chosen the nighttime for our outing so that the sun would not blind us. And then I was shocked when I saw a huge city that it seemed was not destroyed at all. There were banners around, coloured signs, and the lights of cars racing through the streets. My mother said that this place had changed over the years, but only for the better. They themselves could not understand how the world had recovered so quickly. The lights of the city and the noise were very frightening, and I was also terrified of the vast heights, unlike the ceiling of the bunker. We went to the country house where my parents used to live during all this time. It was noticeably aged and darkened. I ran inside and huddled in a corner with fear. I had an uncontrollable panic attack and a convulsive attack. My father left for help without taking off his protective suit. He came back alone, pale as chalk on the street. They called him crazy and said that there was no end of the world. We spent 16 years underground in vain. My mother and I refused to believe it. But what about the earthquake and the sensor indicators? We found the answers. The next morning, my parents looked into the mailbox and found 16-year-old editions among piles of newspapers. They wrote about a strong earthquake in the state of California. Coming to the bunker, we saw that the antennae and sensors were simply covered with the ground, and some of them were even broken. My dad apparently did everything in a hurry, so they went out of order. We had no choice but to accept the whole situation and move on. After selling the old house and the ill-fated bunker, we bought an apartment. But life on the surface was real torture. The sunlight was alien to me, and the noise outside the window was deafening. I closed all the curtains in the house and found my only solace, the television. It was also very difficult for my parents because they could not return to their previous jobs because of such a long break, so they had to get a low-wage job because of this. We always did not have enough money, so my parents could not hire a psychiatrist for me to bring me back to my senses faster. They could only hire a teacher for me, but he said that I needed to go to school so that firstly, I would still be in society, and secondly, I could master the school curriculum faster because my knowledge was at that of the level of a 5th grader. I didn't even think that I was stupid. I thought that my parents gave me enough knowledge, but apparently not. So the next day I went to school with my father for the first time. I've heard a lot about it, but I never had a huge desire to go there. The prospect of getting up early for several years somehow did not please me because I was used to waking up when I wanted to. I was enrolled in the 5th grade and my classmates reacted very strangely to my appearance. Well, of course, I was older than them and probably stupider. It was so weird that these little guys knew more than me. They laughed at me, but some helped when we were asked to draw a lobster. I fell into a stupor and everyone immediately reached for their smartphones, but I didn't have one, and I didn't know what a lobster was either. I was lucky that the girl from the next desk helped me, and at break, everyone was shocked when they found out that I had no idea what TikTok and Instagram were. My little friends began to enlighten me and actively show me everything, and from such a flow of information, my head was spinning. I said that it was very difficult for me, and I was already living normally, but on the same day, I was convinced that this was not the case. This time, I decided to go on foot because everyone wanted to walk with me. But they went home, and I didn't know where to go. I was walking through an unfamiliar city with identical grey buildings, and I didn't know where I was. And I walked like that until late at night. At midnight, the police finally found me in the park crying on a bench. My parents were freaking out about my long absence. Then I got my first smartphone with a navigator. My father explained how to use it, and now with this smartphone, I was able to calmly reach my home by myself. However, there were other problems. Yes, I mastered a smartphone and even social media, but I could not do anything with my mind. I was still uncomfortable being in a noisy crowd and living at the pace of the city. I used to sit in the school bathroom and cry. And one day, a psychologist saw me there. She asked me what had happened, and I told her everything. I thought Miss Norris would laugh at me like so many others, but she offered to help me, and since then, I went to her after school. Consultations with the psychologist gradually helped me to get used to society, and I even began to feel normal, which could not be said about my mother. One day, she had a panic attack at work because of a lot of noise. She began to shake and then had a real tantrum. My mother was somehow brought to her senses, but this was followed by dismissal. It turned out that this was not the first time, and it scared the customers. Therefore, there's even less money in our family. Dad had to get a second job, but it was very difficult for him. He didn't show that he was having a hard time adjusting to this new crazy world. My father did not have time for many things. He was moody and constantly suppressed a sense of fear of the outside world. It couldn't go on like this anymore, so he made a difficult decision to sell the apartment, leave the city, and move to a small village life. It was calmer and more measured, but terribly boring. My parents became farmers, and I went to a small school, but this time I was enrolled in the 6th grade. But this did not help me to get rid of sidelong glances and whispers. The children here were somehow distant and unfriendly, so I couldn't make friends with anyone here, and it was also very difficult for me to get used to it without the psychologist. I started to shake when I was in the classroom with the children, and once I fell to the floor and I had an incomprehensible seizure. The teacher immediately called the doctors, and my classmates just watched and were afraid to do anything. The doctors came and brought me to my senses, and when they found out about my problem, they threw up their hands. There were no psychologists in this village, and I couldn't go to the city because I didn't have enough money. Neither the principal nor the teacher wanted to have a student with such a mentality in their school, so they expelled me to avoid problems. I thought that was it. I could never get an education because my parents could not hire me a tutor. However, one kind teacher still agreed to study with me for free because she was insanely sorry for me. I was grateful for that, and as soon as I thought that our life was beginning to improve, a tornado was seen in the fields near the village, which demolished everything in its path. I don't know how our house was able to resist, but it was a real miracle. But our entire vegetable garden, as well as the field where my parents worked, was badly damaged. The owner of this field suffered great losses, so he reduced the salaries of the workers and also increased the amount of work. This led to the fact that we had to save on food and return to canned food, which made me sick in the bunker. Oh, how I hate it. But there was no other way out. I decided to help my parents earn money by working in the field in the evenings. But I was not so good at working with my hands, so I was quickly fired. I didn't know what else to do because we were in an extreme desperate situation. More and more often, I thought it would be better if we stayed in the bunker because everything was so familiar there and there were no big problems. I didn't like the outside world. I had dreamed of seeing it for so long, thinking it was a real paradise, but I was wrong. It was somehow different and unfriendly to me. I thought about it all day, and the teacher noticed that I was in a bad mood. She asked me what had happened, and I told her about my family's situation. She smiled, and I offered to work for her because her father was also a farmer and he needed help in caring for animals. I gradually learned everything and received good money gradually. Our family not only got used to this world, but also managed to get out of debt. And after a few months, I was able to go back to school, which no longer scared me. Would you like to visit the bunker? Write your answers in the comments. Click on the thumbs up button under the video and share it with your friends.